I am just going to start out by saying that my background is that I have been working in media relations, public relations, and marketing for about 30 years. I've worked both mainly in Canada, but I've done a couple of stints in Los Angeles and New York City as well. And I've been on the agency side. I have been on the client side. I was vice president of communications at CanWest through the sale to Chorus. I've run about 4 or 5 agencies in media relations and communications strategy. And it's through my 30 years of experience that I fundamentally feel that public relations and media relations and marketing are all actually starting to meld together, especially in this world, to be really part of the same mix. So when it comes to PR, I find that now it fundamentally goes back to what it's always been, and that is how you tell a good story. And whether that story is about you personally as an individual, whether that is the story of your brand, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, but especially in today's world where everything in the media landscape is changing, I'm going to touch on that. Fundamentally, to get down to the basics about your company, your person, your individual, or is about how do you tell the story and what makes that story compelling. So when I teach or when I'm consulting, because I actually left a big job 2 years ago to form a consultancy called Belcourt & Associates. There are no associates, by the way. It's just me. I have a 7-year-old son, Charlie, so he's the only associate that I can think of, and he's usually not that helpful. But I like to talk about how you tell a story, and that is the work that I do with my clients. So I divide my time into 2 buckets. I'm going to show you some samples of my work tonight. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the media landscape in Canada and what it looks like. And then I'm going to go into my agenda here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Media 101, and it's really a redacted version of what people pay me to do professionally, and that is to train them on how to talk to the media, what the media landscape looks like. So where we're going to start tonight is a bit of a pivot from the course description, and what I really want to talk about is, what is your story? How can you craft your story, create your story so that it's compelling? Because a lot of people, and throughout the course of my career, this has happened to me many times, people think their story is something that the media are going to be interested in. They think what they have is news, and they think what they have is different. Just because they've come up with it doesn't mean it's compelling. But what I fundamentally believe is that everybody does have a good story to tell, but you really have to spend the time figuring out what that is. And a lot of people, and fundamentally some big brands, don't do that. So I'm going to do some real-time examples here. You're going to hear a lot of me talking as a storyteller. I'm going to share some stories that I've developed for some smaller companies. I do work with big organizations, but at startup school, I didn't think it was hugely appropriate for me to tell my history with Metro grocery stores and their multi-million-dollar budget. So I'm going to talk about a couple of clients I've worked with that are more that are on the smaller side, but they have an equally compelling story. And frankly, their stories have garnered some pretty serious media results. So what's your story? So media relations is storytelling. It's plain, yep, but it is not simple. In order for a brand to be successful telling their story, you really have to, and I say this to my clients all the time, you need to look inward, dig deep. You have to answer a lot of tough questions. You must be honest about what makes your difference and the greatness of your competition. Because a lot of people, when they're starting out, they think, oh, this is the best idea and I know this, but they refuse to look inward and ask the difficult questions and then put themselves up to the mirror of the competition, which is equally as important. But I'm a pretty optimistic person. Cleo would attest to that. And I really feel every person and every brand has a unique story. It is because there's only one of you. And on the brand side, on the product side, on the invention side, there are a lot that are similar. But if you really take the time as you're crafting your brand story or you're crafting what your product is, and you fundamentally believe with all of your heart, and entrepreneurs and startups are very passionate, you have to understand and come up with your point of difference. And once you've established that point of difference and you understand what makes your story different, then you shape it and then you're in position to tell it. If you're struggling to get to what your point of difference is, then there probably are some larger questions you're going to have to ask yourself and your colleagues. So in my opinion, I believe that those whose brand stories remain simple are the most powerful, and that they're easily understood. That really is the work. It sounds to a lot of people like the simplest thing to do. Here's what I've created, here's who I am, here's what I'm offering. But then everybody needs to remember there are a lot of people out there that think their story is different too. So you really have to take the time to get deep and craft something that is going to be really compelling, not just to the media, not just to the competition, not just for sales. Your story informs all of that. I'm just going to go ahead. So here is, sorry, I'm going back. Here's an example that I want to walk through in real time. This is one of my clients. She is an author and a former very successful restaurateur, and she has a best-selling cookbook, but she really wanted to pivot away from that industry and create a digital destination that she called Crumb. And she launched the business, and after about 6 months, she was like, I'm really not seeing the traction that I thought I was going to see. And we met and we talked about what the problem was, what her challenge was. And I'm very honest and incredibly straightforward when it comes to the language when I talk with clients. And I was very blunt when I said, your story sounds like every other story of every other food influencer on Instagram. You have such assets as a person and as a chef and as a professional. And what I don't see you doing is leaning into that expertise. So we dove pretty deep on her brand work. And this is the story we came up with. And I'm going to do a little bit of reading through here because I want you to really understand that you are a true storyteller and what a true story sounds like. So I'm going to read this verbatim for the moment. So after 15 years in the food industry as a chef, restaurateur, and television personality, Chef Devin Connell has come to a realization, or better yet, a revelation. Her one true love, the love that comes before anything else, is her passion for creating occasions. Listen, anyone can have a good time, but Devin Connell knows how to make a good time because she knows that this is what life comes down to: time. Life is made of moments of time. Devin knows that moments are made to count. She also knows that the key to a good time is in the idea, the prep, the details, the mix, and of course the food. You see, Devin was born to do this. She's kind of food royalty. She literally grew up around food and reasons to celebrate. Her mother, Linda, was the founder of the legendary Ace Bakery and was also, and still is, a master entertainer. So this little Devin apple fell right next to that Linda tree. Now, Chef Devin's unpretentious approach to entertaining is stuff of her own legend, and whether her annual holiday hot wings and champagne party, her backyard hot and sexy multiple martini bars summer situation, or build your best bear birthday party for one of her 2 young sons, her secret sauce to the success of any of her events remains the same. A little more on that later. She has the cred and the authenticity that other digital food first talent can only dream of. It is that IRL expertise that led her to create the digital influence hub Crumb. She believes the fundamentals are essential and the preparation puts the good in good time. So let Deb show us all how to take the special out of occasion, the precious out of the moment, the stuffy out of soiree, the fancy out of fete, and just have a good time. That example of that brand story is the work that I do when I'm working with clients to begin with, to really go that level of detail and find what is truly deep down inside them and their brand and what's going to make it special. As a result of this work, my next step with my clients is to kind of come up with what I feel the pillars are of her brand. And for Devin, her pillars are pretty straightforward. And that it is in the prep, the idea, the details, and the mix. Those are the 4 brand pillars we come away with. And then I dial it even down further where I come to a brand promise, which I'll reveal a little bit later. But what I can say is this very simple idea of all of this language came from just a long, good conversation with Devin. This is what makes her special. We leaned into the words good time so that when I'm now her publicist and when I'm pitching her out, we did a 6-month publicity campaign and she was really, really successful. But at the root of everything with Devon, her whole business concept is incredibly simple. It is about spontaneous entertaining. It's about keeping it simple. It's about being prepared, and it's about using what you've got. And it was done on a shoestring budget. And she's now enjoying a lot of success and brand partnerships on Instagram. But when I'm pitching media and when I'm doing what I do on the publicist side of the things, I really like to focus, unless I can tell the story as a publicity person or as a communicator, unless I'm believing the words coming out of my mouth, it's not going to work, because media aren't going to buy it, and it's just going to sound like everybody else. And I'm not sure, Cleo, if this deck, you are recording it, so this deck is available for other people to kind of take. So I don't want to spend all the time reading through the brand examples, but what I have,
website.
Yeah, it's okay. So the decks, because I don't want to read every single example. I prefer that people can take their time and go through it.
Yeah, no problem. It'll be on the website, guys.
Great. So that is a good example of, this is a story that just came from an honest, simple conversation. And I've put in a couple of other real-time examples. This is DJ Lissa Monet, happens to work with Cleo. And again, looking for a point of difference and trying to reinvent a little bit. I had sat down and just talked for a couple of hours and asked some really critical questions, which I'm going to share with you in a second, excuse me, that you should ask yourself when it's coming to develop what your story is. Now, if I'm working with a client, I'll meet them in the beginning. I really judge the chemistry. We're going to talk a little bit later on in the presentation about how you can get started. But for me as a consultant, I have to have a chemistry with the clients that I work with. I have to believe in their fundamental difference. And as I'm going to be a bit repetitive now, I need to believe in their story, because I'm going to be the one that's telling it. So I've put a couple of real-time examples in here of some of the women, and I tend to work mainly with women, just because when I decided to start my own consultancy, it was something that was important to me. So I have two examples. One is Lissa's brand story is here as well, and it really talks about what makes her different. I have Kaylee Heaps Estrin, who is arguably, I'm going to brag a bit because I think she's fabulous, one of the most successful realtors in the country. And she's created this super agency in Toronto. And she was looking to refresh her brand position and really find out what makes her different as well. So we went deep on hers, and Kaylee is one of those individuals that her point of difference in her brand story is, I've never met anyone that enjoys life as much as Kaylee. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'll read a little bit of her brand story because you can see how special I feel she is. And so when we did the brand work together, and her organization that she's founded, I'll read a bit because she's a really special human. We all know them. We've all heard of them. You know, that friend of a friend, sister, uncle, or colleague that just seems to know how to live, like really, really live. That person that just seems so deeply rooted and present in their life that they just don't seem to be trying so hard. They are living their life fully. It's like they have a secret. It's like it's easy. It's like they got a manual that we didn't. And when I was writing this brand work with her, that was my takeaway from having conversations and doing the work with her, is that she really seems to have this special something, French would say the je ne sais quoi, that, you know, you meet people like that and you're like, wow, how did they do that? And so what I like to do is take that special secret sauce of hers, and then how do I pair that into a real estate concept, and what does that look like? Another example is Suzanne Dimma. Some of you may have heard of her. She was editor-in-chief of House and Home magazine for 15 years, on-air personality at Cityline, and one of the most talented and successful and innovative interior designers in North America. She decided to leave her role at the magazine, and she's opened up actually very COVID-friendly business now, where she's doing virtual online consulting and interior design. I've known Suzanne because of my role as a publicist in agency. I've done a lot of work with clients in House and Home. But Suzanne, again, we wanted to say, what does she have that's different? What can her brand do? How can we speak to her? So with Suzanne, she has this really unique ability to really visualize and create space. And it's almost eerie when she talks about how she designs a space, or when she works with an architect, or she's creating a line with Hudson's Bay. So we leaned in a lot to these skills that she has that seem to be really unique to her. So that was the work that we did with Suzanne, and she's launched her website now, because she is very media friendly. Doing her publicity was actually one of the easiest jobs I've ever had, which is not always the case. But she's got a really rich credentials and a rich background and a rich story. And her virtual consulting business is really taken off, and it's going really well. So what you do with her brand is anybody can buy some of her virtual time to consult on your space. And I'm going to be sharing the brand positions and stories of all of these clients, so you'll be able to see how the two connect. So speaking of a brand essence, and I know it is kind of, maybe you came into this presentation expecting public relations and you're like, I've already had the marketing presentation, but I can't stress enough how much I think the two are combined and how much the two are linked. And I think that they have to go hand in hand, to the point that when I left my big corporate career in a VP comms role, and I went and was asked to come on board to a mid-size agency, the first thing I said to the owners of the business was, I don't just believe in PR anymore. I think it's too limited. I think the future of any successful agency is going to be an agency that has a holistic approach to solving what their clients' businesses' opportunities and challenges are, period. So I'd like to create a team of communication specialists. That's what I consider myself to be. And communications has to come from the root of the brand, and everybody needs to understand how to address the challenges and how to tell the story. Because PR, more and more these days, with the shrink of the media and the change of the landscape in media, can't just exist in a vacuum. And more, I'll talk about this in the landscape section a little bit, content as we know it is increasingly more paid and sponsored. So even just pitching out public relations ideas anymore is becoming a lot more challenging, because a lot of people that you're pitching, who they work for has changed so much that it's not the same as it used to be. So I think that when we're approaching a communication strategy, which is what I really call public relations now, you have to, again, come from the root of the story and the brand essence. So when I start work with any of my clients as their publicist, I do the story exercise first, and then we distill down what their brand essence and their brand promise is. So when we talk about the essence of the brand, this is where it's a little, I don't know, this is kind of the sexy part of marketing, the part that I really like. This is, what is the spirit of your brand? Meaning, what does it stand for? Why did you create it? Why are you doing what you're doing? What kind of brand is it? Is it a feisty brand? Is it a hopeful brand? Is it a brand about change? Is it a brand about innovation? Is it a brand about comfort? Is it a brand about love? It's really starting to explore some of those questions about what is the essence of the brand that you've created, whether that is a product or whether you are a personality. Going back to the concept of simplicity, I believe it is a singular idea. I think that, and I'm going to show some examples of some big brands that I love and their brand essence, and then go back to some of the people we just looked at and talk about their brand promise and their brand essence. It's a singular idea and it's not complicated. Simplicity is everything. And I think that is really fundamental when you're talking about what the essence of your brand is. It is a path to inspire, because the brand essence and promise at the root of your idea, your organization, or your company really needs to be able to lift people up around you, regardless of your place in the organization. But as an entrepreneur, you are the leader and the people that people look to. So it really needs to create a path to inspire. It is inwardly focused. You can talk about campaigns and communication campaigns and marketing campaigns. Those are the outward consuming trade sales focused. But a brand essence is a really beautiful thing, because it's really talking about the very personal reason the brand exists. And finally, it informs everything. So once I have gotten to the root of a brand with a client, either the essence or the promise, anything that happens within the organization, and I don't care what it is, unless you can take whatever decision you're going to make and put it up against your brand promise, your brand essence, and say, does it fit? We're making this decision. Is it laddering back up to what we think our story is and what we think our brand is? It makes the decision-making process very easy. So some of my favorite examples, Nike is everyone is an athlete. That is their brand essence. Glossier is democratizing beauty. Wealth Simple is investing for everyone. And a brand promise, a little bit of a difference because you're getting a little bit more consumer focused here and it's more customer focused. So some of the critical questions to ask yourself on a brand promise is market definition. What category is your brand competing in and what context does your brand have that is relevant to your customer? Where is the opportunity? Who is your target? Some of the thinking that you have to do is who are we talking to? In any successful communication strategy, defining the customer, I think we can all agree, is critical. And when you're creating a very specific communication campaign to communicate that brand promise, we need to know what kind of media they're consuming in order to create any kind of substantial plan. So that's one of the biggest things that goes into the promise of a brand as well. What is the most compelling benefit to your customer that you can own? And again, that's going back to that really kind of simple point of what is the point of difference? And in the beginning, when I said it sounds very plain, but it's certainly not simple. And what is the reason to believe? What evidence is there in your language to support what your brand stands for? So where Crumb by Devin Connell, one of the earlier examples, I went through her brand story, her brand essence, but her brand promise combined is Crumb by Devin Connell is a one-of-a-kind digital destination that shows people how to have a good time. So this informs everything, every decision that she now makes as a business owner. She now has her short elevator pitch when she meets people in any kind of situation and they ask her what she does. I have a one-of-a-kind digital destination that really shows people how to have a good time. Simple, to the point, and then it intrigues people. They want to know more. And if anything she's doing in her business now, whether branded content, whether she's teaching classes, whether she's doing a media appearance, if the spirit of good time and the concept of good time is not reflected in what she's doing, then it goes away. Everything in her life and her brand as Crumb is about showing people how to have a good time. And if it doesn't, if the idea, if the content, if the partner doesn't reflect that promise, then you move on. So like I said, it can make decisions really easy, and that's proving to be the case for her. DJ Lissa Monet's company, we actually did a complete pivot to a rename, and the new company is called Resonant Sound, and their brand promise is Resonant Sound, get a move on. So this is an organization that supports female DJs across the country and lifts them up, believes in empowering women. And Lissa is one of the most famous DJs to come out of our country, and she's pretty spectacular. Her whole thing is she wants to inspire people to move and to force change and create change and lift women up in an industry that traditionally has not been very fair to women. So we leaned in for that work. We leaned into the word move. And this brand promise and her brand essence is really a call to action. We want you to dance. We want you to have a good time. We want to be responsible for the soundtrack of your occasion. But at the same time, we want to be a force for change. We want to lift women up. And all of that is really encapsulated in her brand promise. Kaylee's, we leaned into Kaylee's whole reason. And that is Heaps Estrin knows how to live. It's a fun play on words. When she's talking about her organization, she talks a lot about quality of life. She understands your family. She understands neighborhoods. She understands that living and how you live and where you live and the moments that make up your time are so critical to all of us and our well-being and our happiness. So now she talks about the point of difference for her. It's Heaps Estrin knows how to live. Suzanne Dimma brand promise. This was a really fun one. Suzanne Dimma will give you space, and meaning give you space, meaning her company is a virtual consultancy. So she's literally giving you her space, which I thought was a lot of fun. But she is creating space, and there is a lot like Kaylee's work. There's nothing really more important than our space outside of the people in our lives and the loved ones and friends and the things that we choose to surround ourselves with. Space and where we spend our time, especially ironically, because this was done long before COVID, has become really critical. And a lot of people are re-examining their space right now. But I leaned into the word space when talking about Suzanne's work. One of my other clients that I work with is a very famous golf course in Cape Breton. It was built in a deserted, almost dead mining town, and Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs are now the #1 and #10 golf courses in the world. It is a huge success story. But their entire reason for their brand is, and they're expanding, they're doing new properties all over the world, is they want to give back to the communities in which they serve, and they always want to operate in a spectacular site. They resurrected the town. They now employ 600 people in the town. Knock on wood, their season is going to open up in 2 weeks. But their brand promise was a little bit more lengthy, because I kind of wanted to use a bit more of the language to really combine, because they're so special. But a Cabot experience is a memory-making, one-of-a-kind adventure destination that contributes to an authentic and beautiful life. Cabot is committed to supporting, enriching, and honoring the local communities in which they operate. It's critical to the owner of the business that anywhere that they put a hospitality site has to give back to the community, make the place better, and provide a memory-making, once-in-a-lifetime experience. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto was a client that we did the branding and media relations for. And this brand promise was very it was so simple, it was controversial, especially with their board of directors, and everybody, not all of us, but a lot of us have a board and investors and everyone that we're accountable to. But the Museum of Contemporary Art Toronto will make you think differently. That is a very heady and big brand promise. That the programming at this brand new museum in the Junction in Toronto is literally going to change the way you think. It was a bit of a leap, and it's been a successful leap for them, and they're very much living up to that brand promise. But this one was a bit of a flyer, if you will, but one that turned out quite well. Beautiful gin brand, Empress 1908. Highly encourage you to look them up on Instagram. Their content is beautiful. Their product is made 100% naturally on the island of Victoria. If that's what you're into, and cocktail culture is your thing, it's a really beautiful Canadian brand story, and one that I was really proud to work on. And we went bold and big with them because the gin actually changes color when you pour it. And the ingredients of it are really quite botanical. It's a very botanical experience. It's really beautiful. But their brand promise was Empress 1908 is the beginning of the most beautiful cocktail experience in the world. And you know, you take some time and go on their Instagram channel, you can see that that is the brand promise. They've created a beautiful product that tastes great, but it's also highly shareable, and they're enjoying great success too. So you're probably thinking, that's great, good for you, well done for you on the work, but what are some of the questions that we may have to ask ourselves, or I may have to ask myself as a team, in order to get to that story? And what is my story? And so I've put them out there. This is kind of my process. This is kind of what people pay me for. I am a writer at the end of the day, and I love writing. Any good communications person I feel that's worth their salt really has to have a love of language and understand how to use words, because they're really beautiful, and it's a very special part of what I do. It's my favorite part of my business. But sample questions are, what are the goals for the brand? And be really, really honest outside of we want to make money. What is the problem we are solving, or the opportunity you're creating? What stage of the narrative are you at? For a lot of people in an entrepreneurial space, the answer may be, well, we're at the beginning. Well, what stage of your narrative are you at? Where did you come to before this opportunity? What made you do that? Where are you at in your personal story? That's what I mean by narrative. Why are you doing this now? Who is the audience for your story? Who is the competition? Who do you admire, both personally and as a brand? That's a question that I ask my clients all the time when we do an onboard. And this is the onboard that I do with my clients. I have them fill this out in writing very, very fully. And then my process is, and Cleo's been through the process, and then we meet, and I get even deeper based on the responses. But they're pretty personal, and I want to know, who do you admire? What brands do you admire? What people do you admire? Why do you admire them? What are they doing that you think is admirable? or cool, or what is it that they stand for that you see yourself in, and what does that look like? What do you want to do? Like, what is important to you? Why are you doing what you do? And I ask myself these critical questions when I left a very big job to go solo. And I would answer that question as, why did I leave the big gig? For me, it was, I have a 7-year-old son. And for the first 5 years of his life, I saw him for 45 minutes a day. He was a baby, not my most favorite stage, so I was kind of okay with it at the time. But I did it because I've been doing it for 30 years. And I wanted to hold his hand when I walked to school every day, and not show up and leave my house when the nanny came, and come home and see him for a half an hour and put him to bed. It wasn't serving me anymore. I was finding that it wasn't really how I wanted to spend my time. And I really wanted to just focus on the things that I wanted to do. So I was like, what's important to me is I want to be there more. My husband has a very big corporate job. And it's serving him greatly right now. So when I had to get very personal, the reasons for my move, or the reasons for my shift, became incredibly personal to me. So that is just the kind of honest conversation you need to have with your partners, or with yourself, or with any stakeholders that matter in the business. What are you doing that you want to change? And if the answer is nothing, and you think that it's gliding along perfectly, I'd be shocked, because I think everybody wants to evolve and change, but some people, that is the question. But I would say the majority of the people that I've had the honor to work with absolutely want to change something, even if they're at the very beginning of their journey. How will success be measured for you, for your partners, and for your customers? I did have, in the last agency that I ran, we had a division that worked with fintech startups. And that was, and again, it's one of the more challenging areas to work in, just startup in general, because investors want a return, and the CFO wants to see where every single dime and dollar is being spent. And if it's not immediately generating a return on investment, then it's really tough. And I've been in those rooms with those startup companies with that space. And I start every conversation with, if you're going to be hiring a communications consultant for anything, it is going to take time. Good communication strategies do not happen overnight. So if you think we're going to come in here and within 3 months get you a slew of media relations and a ton of press, and that is your expectation, it's not going to happen that way. A good plan takes time to roll out. So success being measured, and what that KPI looks like, I get to the root of that very quickly off the top, whether it was in a big agency role, or whether it's just working with clients that I work with now, to set those expectations. Because a lot of people's expectations when it comes to media relations is that it's going to fix all the problems because we don't have to spend money on it, when it actually doesn't work like that. It actually is a pretty critical investment. And I'll talk a bit about investment towards the end. What is mandatory for you? Both positive and negative. What will you not do? What do you have to do? What will you never even consider? What is a non-starter for you? Answering all those questions too is another really important. And then one of my favorite ones, and I ask it in a couple of different ways with different clients, is, what does the dream look like? So my dream when I left was, my dream one day is very simple, is that one day I would love to be able to go into business with my husband, because he is one of the most talented communication professionals in the game. That would be a dream down the road. My dream is that I would love to have a business that works and supports women, particularly young women in the entrepreneurial space. My dream is that I would like to be able to do big projects and then be able to work with younger women and not charge them the same rate that I would a giant corporation. My dream looks like I'm always continually learning. For me, the dream was very much about, I want to create a situation where I can help the people who I think need lifting up. I can still grow and learn, and I may be able to turn this into a family business one day. So those are all my critical questions. And a lot of them sometimes can get very personal. And a lot of the time when you come out of a critical question phase, you may be looking at some answers that are going to surprise you, and that may turn the business or the story or the narrative in a completely different direction. So it's time to tell your story. So I would encourage you to think about, what do you want to say? And we'll get into this now. What would you like to hear or read about your brand, your organization, or your project? What is the ideal headline for your story of your product, for yourself, for your company? And what impression do you want to leave the people, the customers, and the media with? And these are more critical questions to ask, but if you were dreaming of what would be the most perfect story to read about yourselves, whether it's in Fast Company or Refinery 29, or whether it's on Batches Media, whether you're going to talk to Gen Z, it's just really what is the dream. And I have anecdote from my agency days where I worked with Metro grocery stores for about 4 years. And when we first started working together, they were a grocery store chain that had just been reinvested in. They hired an incredibly elegant marketing team and senior leadership team. And the first question, and they were undergoing major change, and the stores had to change. It was not a good customer experience or a customer journey at all. So when we started the work with this particular client, and it was one of our larger ones at the time, we asked them all these questions. And the president of Metro said to me, Deb, the ideal headline for my story is Metro's Makeover. And I want to see it in the front page of Report on Business magazine. And I said, that's a great idea. But I said, when do you want to see that happen? He said, I want to see that happen within the year. And I said, it's not going to happen within the year because you have too much work to do. You have to, before you get to your dream story, establish all of the proof points for that story. And from what I can tell, you have a lot of work to do. So we worked pretty methodically over the course of about a year and a half, just shy of 2 years, to make sure that we were starting to work with some influencers in the space that made sense, that we were talking to the communities in which they lived and served. We had a very regional approach to the media, just because we wanted to ensure that customers on the ground in the neighborhoods were hearing about the new Metro, and it was a good customer experience, and people were enjoying the experience. So we kind of very localized our communication strategy. And then after a year and a half, when the proof points were there, when the stock started to rise and when customers were sharing positive reviews, and then we said, okay, it's time for us to go to the Globe and Mail and Report on Business, and it's time for us to pitch this story about the ideal headline that you want to see. And when we were doing the interviews, so they were obviously interested because it was a big business story. But when you're pitching something like the Report on Business magazine, especially the now retired retail reporter, Marina Strauss, who is one of the best in the business and one of the toughest reporters in the game, she is going to go deep, and you need to be prepared. So I said to the client, when you want to tell this story, you better have the proof points everywhere that this story is one that's going to be told, because they're going to come at you and they're going to go deep on the details. Well, we got very lucky that the president of the organization was from an Italian grocery family named Carmine. He was Carmine Fortino. And we convinced the reporter to meet him in the produce section of one of the new grocery stores. She never, ever came to an interview. She only ever did anything by the phone. So that was a bit of a miracle. And they spent 2 hours walking the grocery store and talking. And the story, when it came out 2 weeks later, was a photo of Carmine Fortino in front of the lettuce in the new Metro grocery store. And the headline was Metro's Makeover. So it can work, but it takes time. It takes time to build up the business and the story, and then get an outcome like that. It's one of my favorite stories. It was incredibly gratifying, but it didn't happen overnight. And that's somebody that has the resources like a Metro. So just going to take a quick sip of water here. So Media 101. This is kind of going down to back to the basics. One of the services that I provide to clients, both the Metro grocery store size and some of my newer clients in my consultancy practice, is media training. So I get brought in to train executive teams. I get brought in to train celebrities. I just recently completed a training with the national brow artist for Benefit Cosmetics, who was a 20-something Instagram superstar who they had just hired, and she was going cross-country on a media tour. So I kind of go all over the place because I feel the fundamentals. I tailor this presentation and training. Sometimes training is a day, sometimes training is 2 days, sometimes training for social media is 3. But I've kind of pulled out of my traditional presentation some of the basics that I think that would be helpful to you guys. So we're going to talk a little bit about journalists and what they want, how to become a master storyteller, developing key messages, quotable quotes, and interview prep. So a journalist is either assigned a story or brings a story idea to an editor. Story ideas can come from the journalist on their own. They've got something they're hot on. Either it's investigative, they have an idea they want to pursue, or they're pitched an idea by someone like me, or they get assigned a story by the editorial board. They're given a word count. They're on a deadline, and this could be anywhere from an hour to weeks. That traditionally is more of a news-focused story, but respecting that usually outside of lifestyle or a big business story, a lot of the news cycle happens really quickly, and so to be able to respond to that quickly is greatly appreciated. They often do not write the headline for their story, and this is where a lot of people can get tripped up, where they are doing an interview with somebody and they think that they know how it's going to come out, but an editor could read it and write something completely different. The editor writes the headlines, the journalist doesn't. They often don't see it until it's final and it's in print or whether it's posted online. So they're kind of submit their story, and then the editor does what an editor's job is, and then they change it. So what do they want? Journalists want to be first. They want exclusive stories and good interviews that are valued. They want to develop good sources and spokespeople. And this is an opportunity for any brand or brand spokesperson, is how great it would be that you are the ones that they come back to get your professional opinion on a situation within your category. I tend to stay away from doing any media interviews because I fundamentally believe, old school publicity wise, that I'm here to make other people look good or to solve their challenges or be there for them in a time of crisis. It is not about me. In my industry, there are a lot of people who like to go on and talk about communications. I don't want that. There are people that are good at it, but within your category, it is a great honor and great profile and great press for you to be a good source for somebody if they're talking about you as a specialist within your field. I'm going to repeat some things here because I think it's important. Timely responses are critical. You don't make the media wait, because if you make the media wait, they're not going to come back to you again. They want to be fair and they want to be accurate. But most of all, and it's going back to this word that is so fundamental to the business, they want a good story. They want to bring something to their editor and the editor to say, that was a really good story, because the more good stories they file and the more good stories they tell, the more the click-through rate goes up. And if it's in the, makes my heart hurt, the print industry that is suffering a lot right now. But if it sells pages of it, it attracts advertisers. I mean, good stories, it just comes down to good content. And if you have the good content and if you have the exclusive content, then it helps with the business and the business of media. What makes a good story? Content, key messages that deliver what you want and need to say, and the prepping what you want and need to say is done well in advance. Taking the time to write down what are the points that you want to get across, what do you think is going to be beneficial to you in the business. Context, proof points that give your message relevance and credibility. That's the facts. That's where facts come in. You want to have an idea for a story. This is what I want to pitch, or this is what I want to say. Here's why I think it's valid. That is the proof points. And then anecdotes to make what you say understandable and quotable. So to be able to say things like, let me elaborate, by giving an anecdote that will support your proof point and ultimately drive your key message home. That's just a good story. Let me tell you this story. Here's why I think it's important. And oh my God, I've got to tell you some examples about why it was so successful. That is just, again, that's good storytelling. So how do you prep for any kind of media opportunity? Journalists, and when I say journalists, I'm going to go into categories in a second, but when I say journalists, I'm not necessarily talking about writers. I'm talking about podcasts. I'm talking about Instagram Live. I'm talking about Facebook if they survive this massive boycott. But it's any kind of media opportunity. But I'm a bit old school, so I really like using the word journalist because I'm very friendly with a lot of them. Some of them have become incredibly close in my life and important to my success. And I think it's a real art form to be a good journalist, so I'm always going to honor that word. They're always looking for a great soundbite. So you want to do your best to get that over with at the top. So you want to really think about, what is a quote? What is a quote that will land, that comes out of your mouth and you're like, oh, I really want them to write about that. I really want them to use it. And so what a good quote is, it uses everyday language, it avoids jargon, it creates interest, and it's energetic and it's colorful. When I do a lot of agency training work, which is actually how I met Cleo in the first place, where I do management training and team training for account teams at mid-size agencies and some larger agencies. And one of the things that I drive home a lot when I'm working with people, and they're young people mostly, is just speak common language, whatever language you're speaking in. You don't need to get fancy with your words or your acronyms. You don't need to impress everybody. You can just tell your story. And the more simpler you make it, and the more interesting that you make it, the better that it's going to be. And that doesn't just apply to media, that actually applies to life. So I go hard on just speak simply. Because if you try and get fancy, two things are going to happen. You're not going to remember what your key message is or what you're supposed to say. You're going to trip over yourself, and you're probably not going to drive your point home. So speaking of our media landscape, I think we're all well aware how much it has changed. I come from a very fortunate time that during my career in communications and publicity, both on a corporate level, and I worked in entertainment and fashion publicity for a long time too. I got the great pleasure to work for Jeffrey Daw, who is one of the most legendary publishers in this country, North America, I would argue, as his communication director for 3 of his magazines about 15 years ago, and really got the masterclass on how a magazine is put together and what role a publisher plays, including in sales, which was pretty critical. And that was when budgets were huge. There was lots of revenue. Digital hadn't really stepped in so much. So you just kind of, the world was your oyster. And now I think we've all seen the real transition away from print in newspapers and magazines and local newspapers. And again, I find all of that a little bit sad, but it's definitely shifted to digital and social. Broadcast is still strong, but whose eyeballs are on TV is changed very, very significantly. News is still news. It's always going to be important, but how we're consuming our media has changed greatly. And I don't think that I need to tell anybody listening to me talk about that. It's just kind of the reality. Podcasts are becoming and have become one of the most consumed forms of media, and exciting to me. Radio is still important. And then there's going to be the reality, and I do not have a crystal ball, this is my own personal opinion, of what COVID is going to do to media, and how quickly are we going to be getting back to a regular way of doing things, or is this now virtual situation that we have in broadcast only going to support the strength of a digital growth? But is that actually good news for people? Because it's been my experience during the last 3 months that for the first month or so of the pandemic, people only wanted pandemic stories, and that's natural when there's a world event. That didn't surprise me. My business is starting to pick up again, and I'm actually working with various editors and producers and podcast producers to put my clients in front of them in a different way. And because everything can happen so quickly and so nimbly now, I think that content's going to get ramped up, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for smaller businesses to be able to get their stories out there as well. I mean, as sad as I may be about seeing beautiful print traditional magazines on the decline a little bit, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I actually think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity out there now because of the switch to digital and what that looks like. So it's ever evolving, and I think it's going to be 100% driven by the next generation Z, and I think millennials have a lot to do with it as well, but I think it also just comes down to ad revenue and how things are going to change. So when you are preparing for an interview, I mean, I repeat the word preparation all the time with clients, whether it's agency or a personal client. You do your homework. You know who you're speaking to, you research everything that they've written, you understand their style, you see where they potentially could go or not go, anticipate the likely questions, especially ones that could be tough. Don't repeat negative questions. If somebody asks you one, you pivot with a direct answer. There are no bad questions. And if you're dreading a question, you expect it and prepare for it. And I've been continually surprised as I go through media training in my career that there have been some people in some very senior roles, both in the political landscape and in corporate Canada, that think the bad question is never going to come, or they don't have the brand story down, or they figure they're just going to wing it or they'll get it. So the only thing that I can stress to anybody before you're doing any kind of interaction with media, regardless of what channel it is, you have to be prepared. You have to listen, and if you don't understand the question, it's 100% okay to raise your hand and ask for clarification. It's important to pause. I like this advice for a panel as well, so I put the panel work up, because panels, either in real life or in a virtual situation, are becoming a really popular way for people to share opinions and communicate. You can pause. You don't need to rush. It's okay to what I call a bridge phase if you're caught off guard. I'm so glad you asked me that question. If you've forgotten your message, or you find that you need some time to just absorb the question and go into your brain and find the message that you wanted to support the answer with, deliver your key messages. And again, it's repetitive, but this is why media training works. State your message, support it by elaboration. Illustrate means expand on it. Make it real and use examples. It's okay to do that. It doesn't have to be robotic in its delivery, but you can talk about, this is my key message. I'm supporting it with this fact. Let me give you an example. The golden rule in any of it is tell the truth. Release confirmed facts, correct misinformation. Never, ever, ever speculate. And if you don't know the answer or don't have the information, you can connect with someone who does, or you can get back to a journalist or an interviewer with the correct information. That's 100% okay. What not to do: speculate again, exaggerate, go too far off topic, be thrown by a hostile question, forget your objective and key messages. That's where preparation is key. Ever reveal confidential information. You never say no comment. That happens in the movies, or people who are not prepared for the opportunity, whether it's proactive or reactive media opportunity. You go off the record. There is no such thing as being off the record. Everything that you say or disclose or talk about is on the record, even if the journalist says it's not. They can say it's on something called background, which means you're giving them information and you don't have to be named. But I think what the world is seeing now, as we're seeing a lot of information being shared and reckonings happening and all sorts of different things happening, is that you need to be very careful with your language and your information that you communicate, because more and more people are using information as a weapon. Whether it's fair or not, it's not for me to judge. But just be careful with what comes out of your mouth or what you write down. And repeat the negative. It's just something worth noting twice. Techniques in an interview, something called blocking and bridging. So you always answer journalist questions, but you don't limit your response to the exact question. You can block the negative and then bridge to a positive. And don't wait for an invitation to share good news, because it may never come. You know why you're talking to somebody, you know why you're on the panel, you know why you're doing the podcast, you know why you're doing the Instagram live, whatever it is. You know your agenda going into the opportunity. So if you are getting questions that don't allow you to get your message, you pivot to kind of say, I'm so glad you asked me that question, but actually what I really want to talk to you about is this. And if you're not seeing that they're giving you an open door and invitation to share your story, you need to fit it in there and you need to squeeze it. That just comes with practice. And practice makes perfect. I'm a huge fan of practicing with colleagues, practicing in the mirror, practice as much as you can, because getting good at media takes time. Flagging is a great technique. It allows you to put more emphasis on certain points that support your key message. For example, this is the most important point. I'm so glad you asked me that question. At XYZ, or in my work that I do, my most important thing is really taking the time to just kind of use a phrase that really creates or drives attention to the number one thing that you want to get across. Here's something I'm really excited about, those sorts of things. And cherry picking happens a lot. So journalists or panelists or interviewers or moderators can tend to throw a whole bunch of questions at you at once. You just pick the one that you think is going to get your point across and go from there. It's a technique in the industry, and it allows the conversation to refocus back to what you really want to say. So if you're doing a phone or for print, you give yourself time to prepare, a lot of time. You isolate yourself with the call so there's no distractions. You keep your messages in front of you as well as a notepad for notes. Since you cannot see the face of the reporter, ask often for feedback on your comments to ensure understanding. And if they stretch out the silence, don't fill it. This is a bit of an old technique. When you have finished answering a question fully to your best ability and you've said what you want to say, you're done. A lot of journalists will wait to see if the silence makes you uncomfortable to kind of prompt you to say more, but you never have to do that. When you've answered the question to your satisfaction, you're finished answering the question. One-on-one in person, same thing. I'm going to repeat it probably till I stop working. Preparation is key. You have to be prepared. You have to take your time to do your research and to make sure that you're ready to deliver all your messages. Try and control the location, be comfortable. Whenever I'm putting a client in a one-on-one situation, I always try and control the location of the interview just to make sure they're at their most like peak comfort, because a coffee shop where a journalist may want to do it may not be the solution. So I kind of like to make it something a bit more organic. You can keep your notes in front of you. That's not a problem. It's not unprofessional in any way. If you want to have to refer to something or refer to some notes, it's 100% acceptable. Be yourself and ask questions back. It's not just their job to ask questions and your job to answer them. You can engage in a dialogue, because I find most of the time, if you're actually engaging in a dialogue, you're probably going to get to, you're going to be more comfortable, and then you're going to get to a place where some really interesting stuff will happen. And again, once you've answered the question, you're done. You don't have to fill silences. Podcast and radio, prepare. Find out if it's live or recorded. For most of the radio piece, make sure it's a noise-free environment. Get your energy level way up. Standing up is really helpful. Practice out loud, warm up your voice, and speak at your normal pace. Make sure you have plenty of color, anecdotes, facts, and proof points. Podcast and radio, and I just taped a podcast, finished doing one where I was a guest. I mean, you're on there for a half an hour. It's a long time, and radio interviews tend to be longer too. And because you have to really paint the picture with your voice, anecdotes are really key here, and it's good to have a lot of them kind of up your sleeve to pull out when you need them. Broadcast, prepare, practice, and practice again. A lot of my clients will go on national morning lifestyle shows, so most of them know what they're doing in this regard, but I do have some clients in the entrepreneurial and startup space. But BNN and Bloomberg look around a lot for those kinds of interviews. I worked pretty extensively in cannabis over the course of the last year, and one client that we worked with became the regular that would go on BNN Bloomberg. So, I mean, those opportunities still exist. So find out if it's live or recorded, if it's news or lifestyle, and ask for the questions in advance if possible. More and more on a lot of interviews, because editorial teams and pools are shrinking just because of budget cuts. In probably 15 years ago, questions in advance would not have been possible. Now, because you have journalists and reporters and producers doing the job of what used to be 5 people, they're more open to giving the questions in advance now, or even answering the questions via email, which is relatively new in the industry, just because they're kind of really pressed for time and they want to get going. And relax. In a broadcast situation, I'll talk about this a little bit more. You're not in charge. You're a guest. and you're there to talk as an expert on something most of the time, and you're just following their lead. So this is actually, it feels like television people are really freaked out by it, but you're not in charge. They are. Interview categories, you have daytime. You have morning TV, breakfast television or your morning. Daytime would be a City Line or Maryland Dennis or The Social. Live to tape, live format. There's usually an audience. Probably a larger set, 1 to 4 hosts, and any segment length is around 5 to 8 minutes. Morning TV, it's live, just crew. 1 to 2 hosts, segments are shorter because they like to jam a lot of information on there. And a television interview is entertainment television, or it's going to be news, breaking news, CBC, either morning news, lunchtime news, online interview, a digital story, it doesn't matter, but it's traditionally always pre-recorded. It's not going to be a live situation. The players and broadcasts, you have the host. Like I said, you're not in charge. They're there to keep segment timing. They have a producer in their ear. They've got you, the expert, and then they have the audience or their crew. It seems very overwhelming to a lot of people. If you do get the opportunity to do television the first time, you follow their lead and their timing, and you're in really good hands when it comes to you're really just there. You have to be prepared, know what you're talking about, but they're going to guide you through the entire thing. There is the expert on the topic. That traditionally is going to be you. You focus on the host only, and you listen to their questions and you go with their flow. And then the producer is the one that is putting together the segment, coming up with the idea, or they're the ones that I would pitch as the publicist, or your communications person would pitch with the idea that they think would be newsworthy for the show. On air flow, there is the intro. They welcome back, nice to meet you, and a good host will keep this short because they know they want to get to what's called the meat and potatoes, which is where you want to deliver your message and your story. And then they close it up. They will give you a minute or 30 seconds before the end of the interview, and then it's over. Rules of the road, and this I apply to, I talk a little bit about social media live in here too. You look at the interviewer, the host, never to the camera or a camera. You act as if the camera is on you at all times. You smile. A lot of people forget, they just look like they're terrified, or they have what in the industry we call RBF, which is resting bitch face, because they're not bitchy, they're just terrified to be being interviewed. But it's okay, it's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be a good experience. Remember body language and posture. Whenever an interview is over, you don't stand up and walk away until you're told to. Have fun and focus at the same time. If you're demoing a product that you've created or something you've invented, they're going to tell you what to do and where to do it. But you're going to want to showcase it to the best of your ability, but you're in good hands with the production team. If you make a mistake, it's fine. You correct it and you move on. My bad, sorry about that. You can stumble. Everyone's done it. It happens to the best of us. It's not anything, but I would really encourage to try and get rid of space fillers. Like truly, you'd be surprised how many people that have been doing media for a very long time still tend to default back to those. And be on brand for the brand you represent. I mean, I'm sure within the people that are currently watching this presentation, there's hundreds of amazing good ideas and brand potential out there, but you just represent your brand. If you have designed the most incredible new piece of sporting equipment, just reflect the brand. It's really important. You don't have to wear a suit and tie. You can just be authentic to who you are and what you're there to talk about. Just be yourself. It's the most important brand there is. Get the most from the hosts. A good host will make or break a segment or an interview. One little trick that I like to do before any interview, if it's going to be in a social media live or broadcast situation or even a podcast, is take the time to chat them up before you actually get going, and then weave in some of that personal chat during the interview. Tends to make it a lot more fun. Prep, again, I'm getting into my broken record, but it's never going to change. Know who you're talking to. Know what you can and can't say. Know who the audience is. Do some research on who watches the show, and rehearse. It's okay to rehearse your interview. Sit down with a family member or a partner and say, I really want to go through potential questions. I want to go through the segment. I want to talk about my interview. I want you to pretend to be the podcast host, just so you can make sure that you're delivering your best story. Social media and content, I know that there's been a startup school on this, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but you have to find what your voice is for the content on your social channels and any social media interview opportunities. Keeping it simple is really critical. What is your kind of social signature? What is going to be your vibe in an interview on social? What sorts of things do you want to say? Engage with your followers and make the messages personal and respond in a consistent time of day. Product names are critical and should become second nature. Every time you are talking about your brand or what it is you're selling, you should just become very much of I like the word opportunist. And I talked about this in a podcast that I just did with Cleo and her partners. It's not a bad word to me. You're trying to sell something, and at the end of the day, you should be dropping in whatever it is you're trying to sell as often as you can, and take advantage of the opportunity. Have one account. There's a bunch of different people. I've always given the same advice when people are sharing their stories is they're like, oh, I have my personal account and then I've got my business account. If you're an entrepreneur, if it's a startup, if it was you're focusing on, you have to take the time to focus on one channel. That's my personal preference when I'm working with brands and people. Social media live. It's not unlike the lessons in a broadcast interview, but you just have more time. We've talked about that a little bit. But there's more prep because there's more space to fill. So this is the opportunity to go really deep on your brand and your story. Podcasts, Instagram Live, great examples of this, and it's only growing and it's not going anywhere. Big media production companies like Entertainment One in Toronto have developed huge, large teams that are just devoted to social live and podcasts now. So they're really looking to produce and find more guests for that, which is where that exciting opportunity and the change comes from. But it's an opportunity to have a conversation that can last 30 minutes about what you want to say. It's a lot of information. And for anything tape video, rehearsal is critical and it's totally fine. Influencer one-on-one. This doesn't apply to everybody's business, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But it's a great way if you're going to do a social or a live Q&A. I did my very first one. Like I said, I kind of like to be behind the scenes and my job is to make other people look good. But it was an incredibly fun experience. It's a great opportunity to tell your story about what you do. And it's actually more relaxing, I personally think, than any big broadcast opportunity or big print opportunity you can have. Because it really allows people to be engaged. I think it's going to grow, and I think it already is. I'm not saying Instagram is going to grow. I'm saying that social Q&A format live and panel live and podcasts, I think are going to start to eclipse traditional faster than we think. And it was really, really fun. So, and you can create content from that one-on-one. You can ask to be tagged. You're going to have people, after I did it, I had people reach out to me through direct messages on my Instagram, asking me more questions, and there were 3,000 people saw it, and I've got a bunch of new followers, which isn't really critical to my business and not that important to me. I have it more just for kind of have fun with my friends. I understand the platform pretty deeply because of what I do for a living, but it's not key for me to have a big following. But I can see where it could be a huge opportunity for a lot of people. And again, it was so much fun. I had a blast. So, big question when it comes down to it, I'm sure for pretty much everybody who's participating in this chat with me tonight, is how do you get started? What is it worth to you? You are a startup, and spending money on anything, if it's been my experience working with some startups, is it's going to cost money to get started. What is it worth to you? Is the one question that I have asked to a lot of people is, when you are putting together a business plan, what have you carved out for a communication strategy? And if it's not anything, then maybe you should re-examine the budget a little bit. Agency work versus freelance. Agencies can tend to be incredibly effective. There are a lot of very small, mid-sized agencies in North America. I can speak pretty critically to Canada. That because of the change in the media landscape, the agency landscape, that there are a lot of really kind of small shops that have a lot of hustle, that aren't charging what big agencies are charging. There are a lot of really amazing freelancers out there that are looking to do great work with small businesses. So it's really kind of figuring out what the balance is. I believe sounds a bit cheesy and old school, but it's worked for me. Your network is your net worth, and reaching out and getting connected and building a network and finding opportunity, whether it is for media relations, whether it is to tell your story, whether it is to share your story, is pretty critical and is something that you should invest in all the time. That includes finding all opportunities to share your story, being that opportunist I talked about a little bit, because you never know where it's going to go and who else is going to repeat it for you. I like to encourage people to present as much as you possibly can. If there's an opportunity for you to talk, take it. If there's an opportunity for you to talk to people, take it. If you admire a journalist's work or a podcast, you research it, you reach out, you ask to get connected, you do the homework in order to start to build that web that is going to be the network for you to tell your story. I fundamentally believe getting involved in a cause is incredibly important, both something that is meaningful and important to you. For me, the only thing that I'm involved with from a philanthropic standpoint is CAMH. I've been doing it for a number of years. It's very personal to me, and I have deep, deep connections there. But it really informs my story and the story that I want to tell, and is a huge part of my life, but it's also an incredible way to add to my network. As well. I'm very honest when I say that I think that philanthropic work is a great way to grow your business and a great way to meet different people and see who out there you can work with to do great things and affect change, and also to be successful. And my parting quality on how you get started, because you are a small business. I mean, maybe you want to stay a small business. I don't know everyone's business case, but you have to hustle. Whether it is big agency, whether it is a small freelancer, whether it's someone like me who is just me, I work for myself. I learned very early in my career the importance of hustle. And I don't know if you can necessarily teach someone hustle. I think it's a quality you really need to be born with. But you can absolutely look to enlist someone to work for you that's got it, because it's all about hustle, and getting out there and making moves. And being bold and brave and reaching out and raising your hand and ask for the introduction, ask for the opportunity, send that pitch, and hopefully get out there and tell your amazing story. So with that is the end of me and my part. So I have exited.
Yeah, you crushed it.
Okay. Oh, wow. I talked for a long time, guys. I'm sorry.
We love it. The questions document, Deb, has I think 7 or 8 questions in there right now, so you can sure. If you open that up, you can go right ahead. And can you email me the slides when you have a chance to?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going back to my mail here. Sorry, Clay.
Oh, fine.
Okay. Okay, I'm in it. Sorry, Cleo, guys, it's taken a little bit of time to load here. Cleo?
Yeah?
The Google Doc doesn't seem to be opening on my end. Do you want to?
So I'll download it and send it, but in the meantime, I'll tell you the first question.
Yeah, sure.
So the first question is, in what context would these sorts of story pieces be shared? Quest, I need you to give a little bit more context for that. So I'm going to give Deb the next one. So someone had asked, what if you're rebranding? Is it better to rename your accounts and continue posting, or start new social media accounts and only post new content from those?
I think it all depends on what size you are and how engaged your audience is. Like, that's really going to be a case-by-case basis. I'm going through that with a client right now. So her following she's in around the 40 to 50,000 zone. She's got a really engaged audience that's huge fans of her brand. And if you feel that your community will support a change, then you just tell them you're changing. Like, it really kind of depends on where you're at. So we're going to communicate to her audience of people, hey, guess what, guys? Super exciting news. You've been coming here for me and my team. I'm so grateful, but I'm gonna evolve a little bit. So you're gonna refresh. You're gonna see that I'm going to X, Y, Z. So it really what you think that your community can support from a communications perspective.
Got it. So the next question is, what if you want to do a few different things? For example, you're a baker and a gym trainer. Would you create 2 separate accounts or keep it together?
For your brand story, I think if you're a baker and a gym trainer, is the question more like you want to have 2 separate businesses or you have 2 separate passions?
I think it's a person who does 2 different things, like for hustle.
I don't know. I think I would need more context on that that question, but I think that for me, that all sounds like a pretty cool story. I mean, I would love to meet somebody who's into baking, that is also into fitness, that also is into doing all these things. That already I'm intrigued. Let's just put it that way.
Got it. Perfect. Sorry, they keep adding questions, so I can't even send it to you because there's questions just coming in hot.
Ask away. It's totally fine.
Do you have any examples for sales consultants, life or business coaches, or digital transformation experts helping the world go paperless in regards to brand essence and brand promise?
As in suppliers that I would want to recommend that people work with as a resource?
Good question.
Yes, keep going on that one. I mean, if people are looking for resources on good freelancers to work with in all of those spaces, I will happily supply those. There are so many good people out there doing this independently right now. It's amazing.
The person just followed up with an additional comment on that. They said, like the one-liners to present their story. I don't think we still know what that means.
Yeah, Heather. Yeah, for sure, Heather. I will.
Heather?
Yeah, Heather's asked me to, yes, please share the list. And I'm like, no problem.
You're in the chat. Got it. So one person says, would love to hear a bit about storytelling for new product launches for existing brands, especially for products that are vastly different from initial offerings.
So if you're talking about a real-time example of you have a parent company that's been going down the road in children's clothing and all of a sudden they're going to pivot to baby food. Let's just say something like that. Is that more of the line? Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say off the top of my head that if you're going to be going drastically different from what the parent company is to the point that the brand extension doesn't make any sense, then you may want to think about starting a new company. Most good companies that have product extensions and evolve, they always ladder back up to the brand essence or the promise in the first place. And if it's going to be so fundamentally like such a huge leap in the other direction, then I would want to start to have the conversation on how they fit together. And if they don't fit together, you may want to start thinking about pivoting a bit.
Awesome. And then to the person who asked if we're going to have a copy of the presentation, the answer is always yes. You guys can find everything on the Startup School website. Usually if it's up that night, if it's not, it'll be up the next day. And I usually send it in an email as well. So the next question, good old question, Deb, what do you consider a minimum budget to work with someone like yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
That's opening the robe a little bit. Big corporation, I would say brand work for me, just to do the brand work, my rate is in the $10,000 zone just to get to the story, the brand, and a pretty fulsome brand deck. I've worked with some clients. I work on retainer for a publicity month to month. That can look anything like $5,000 to $10,000 a month. And if I'm looking to work with more upstart brands that are supporting young women that are kind of part of my DNA, then I'm always happy to have the conversation. I believe in the company. I won't ever take equity. I'm not interested. A lot of people will though. It's not for me. It's not my jam.
Nice. Someone else asked, are there any relatively cheap freelancers that you recommend?
Relatively cheap? I'm not ever going to say anyone's relatively cheap because anybody who knows what they're doing in this business has to charge what they're worth. So if somebody's offering you a cheap service for a communication strategy, I mean, I would question their ability, but I think that it is getting paid for what you're worth and what is fair for the work has to be respected. So you're going to have to invest some money and you're not going to want a cheap solution to that because there's nothing more important than the author of your story.
Perfect. One person says, I'm still trying to understand how to get started connecting with journalists. How do you make initial contact if you're not working with any agency? Example, if we wanted to get stories into BlogTO, Narcity, etc.
Pitch them. You go on the masthead on the website. Everybody is listed on there. You come up with a compelling pitch with a good story and a good headline, and you pitch. So depending on the nature of the business, you pitch. Listen, there are a lot of good journalists out there that are looking for interesting stories. You write something that grabs them in the headline of the email. You keep the pitch, you keep it short and sweet. You tell them why you think it's a good fit for their publication. You do your homework deep on the publication to make sure. I have a story where there was a features editor at Fashion Magazine who's pretty legendary, who's no longer with them. She's kind of retired and moved to Europe. And she has a story where she had someone pitch her a story on coffee filters. Giant agency, had all the media connections in the world, access to all of the lists. Like, there was no one more connected than this agency. And she wrote back to this account person and said, "You've never read my magazine and it shows. Why do you think I would ever consider doing a story on coffee filters?" And it was actually a pretty public takedown. This is someone who had access to giant budgets and all of the info. If you do your homework and you research the journalist deeply and you write something that is compelling, that is going to be relevant to their reader, go for it. But you're not buying a list anywhere. There's not going to be any shortcut.
I think just, Deb, funny story to add to that. Anybody who's asking how to find them, guys, everybody's email is on the internet. And so you have to do a little bit of digging to find them. But if you ever go to a company or corporation and you can find one person's email and you understand what the email methodology is. So for example, with Ryerson, it's first name dot last name at ryerson.ca, which means it's the same literally for everybody who works at that place. If you can figure out what their methodology is, you can basically reverse engineer anybody's email if you're not able to find it. But you guys have to actually put in work to like dig through that. Yeah. All right, so next question. Whoa, they just keep them coming, guys. We had like 4 and they're like 20.
Let's pick the top 5.
No, literally there's like 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions left. So if you were a brand founder, what's the best way to approach editors to pitch an idea you have to have your product featured in their publication if you don't have a PR team? I think you just answered that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Next question. Do you have any resources to grow your social media following, especially Instagram, or courses you would recommend?
I think that you had a presentation on social media and social media growth, but I will add some of those resources to the list when I follow up with Cleo. Also, you know, like there's some great freelancers, even Cleo, that are really, really good at this. Like some people who can come in and give you a hustle. There's a great organization called the Social Media House, one of my favorite, run by a guy named Mike Mall, who I've worked with a lot. But I think between Cleo and I, we can put together some resources to look at for sure.
Definitely. And guys, check out our social media video with Brent Sterling on the website. It's literally like the head of social at Shopify, so he's a big deal.
And it's where I watched it, and it's really, really good.
I know, he's so awesome. So we're going to skip the next question. It talks about social media again. So this question about the social media platforms, what do you consider essential for your new business? Again, that's in the social media course, guys. Go ahead and take a peek. Brent will walk you through that whole thing. It's literally in his slides. Next question. So how do you keep up with the latest industry news and even staying on top of content? Everyone is a content creator now that things are being recycled. It's a lot to manage and stay on top of.
You've got to be a junkie of culture. You've got to make it be a part. You've got to make it be a part of your mandate that you're going to inform yourself. I mean, I have a pretty strict schedule in my life, but COVID, it hasn't exactly been so strict, but it is definitely part of every day where I take an hour and I read the news. And I just read it. I read New York Times. I have 4 emails that I get every morning that I like. I take the time to surf through social. You have to find time in your day to educate yourself on what's going on with the world and who's new and what's new. And you have to make it a discipline.
Awesome. We have 2 more questions. These are actually really good ones. So Any starter/transition tips for someone looking to switch fields into PR? I worked in retail sales and would love to get into the PR space.
Intern. Offer yourself up for an internship. Like, go find agencies that have clients that you like and offer yourself up for an internship. Say, I'll come and work for you for 6 months. I want to learn.
Awesome. And is there a course you recommend for media trading for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I just gave it to you. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of great media training courses out there. I think a lot of the universities offer them. It's pretty expensive to hire an agency to do it. But there, again, I can include some of those resources in the list, but it's not necessarily a course. You're going to have my information that you can work from for sure, because that's all pretty good questions. But I would, if you don't have any money to spend, or you're not looking to invest the capital, just go online and poke around.
Awesome. And then final question, when would you hire a PR consultant versus agency for a startup looking to get media coverage?
Depends on your budget. It's freelancer versus agency. You're either going to spend $5,000 to $10,000 on an agency, or you're going to have a project-based consultancy with a peers. It depends on what you want to spend. But to me, it's agencies just come with resources. Freelancers you're getting basically one mind as opposed to a team. So agencies are traditionally more expensive because you have access to everybody. Freelancers are just one person. So it's going to come down to budget and what you want to spend and your approach. Like, do you want to work with one person? Do you want to work with a team of people? What does that look like? You can shop, and you can audition as much as you want.
You love it. All right, that's it. That's all. Deb,
Thank you guys for having me. That was a lot of fun.
You're the best ever. Everybody, thanks for coming out. I'll send you guys the survey in your emails afterwards. Love your feedback as always. And stay tuned. I will put the slides up on the website tonight. I'm not going to mail them out right now because I'm just waiting for them, and we've got some lists and stuff. So high five, Deb. Thank you so much for coming, and everybody have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.